Hey everyone. Today I'm going to talk to you about intervals, that is, how far apart notes are. Now, when we talk about intervals, we're not talking about how far apart they are in terms of time. If I play a note on beat 1 and another note later on beat 4, we're talking about how far apart they are as far as pitch goes, what we call as musicians, how far apart they are vertically. So I've written here the names of all of the notes in a C major scale, and I'll show you how musicians use numbers to identify how far apart the notes are. Now, let's start with the obvious. If I went from C to C, the same C, I haven't gone anywhere. I haven't made any steps at all. We call this a unison. Now, unison, you notice U and I like unicycle. We could think of that as being a first. Now, if a C to a C is a first, or a unison, then going from C to C would be a second. From C to D is a second. From C to E gets me a third. From C to F, we'd call that a fourth. 1, 2, 3, 4. From C to a G, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we can call that a fifth. That's ugly 5. And if I went from C all the way up to A, I'd get a sixth. And if I went from C all the way up to B, that'd give me a seventh. And from C all the way up to the next C, it's not a unison anymore because they're not the same C. One is much higher. We call this an octave. Now, the Italians, they were much more clever than us. They just called that one an eighth. And the Italian word for eighth is ottava. And in English, we borrowed that and changed it into octave for the distance of an eighth. You also notice OCT, like octagon. So we see the number 8 is in there anyway. A lot of the times in music, you'll see 8VA, that's pronounced ottava. It means that you've got notes that are being played an octave apart from one another. Now let's look at what those intervals look like on a staff. So if I took that same scale and wrote it out in the traditional way, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, we'll assume that this is in treble clef. Now I can see in this scale, these two notes are a second apart. These two notes are a third apart. That's 1, 2, 3, they're a third apart. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, C to F is a fourth apart. C to G is a fifth apart. C to A is a sixth apart. C to B is a seventh apart. And C to high C is an eighth apart, or an octave apart. Now, later on, we can get a little more nitpicky about intervals, and we can talk about the different kinds of seconds and the different kinds of thirds. There's major and minor intervals, and there's perfect intervals as well. And we'll talk about those in another lesson. Now, once you know this, there's an activity on Tone Savvy that I'm going to show you in a minute that we can use to practice naming different intervals or identifying different intervals that we see. So here's the Tone Savvy exercise for interval identification. And in this exercise, it asks us to tell how far apart notes are. Remember, we're not looking how far apart they are from left to right, but how far apart they are vertically. So I see here, again, it's in treble clef, we have an E, and then we have an F sharp. And I can see from that E to the F sharp, one is on a line that is the next space up, so I can tell these must be a second apart. So if I click on second, it tells me that I'm correct. Now here's the next interval. Let me erase these markings that are there. So here I can see C, that'd be a D, E, F, G, A, B. So that note must be a B, and I can count up numbers. That C would be 1, D is 2, E is 3, F is 4, G is 5, A is 6, B is 7. So that must be a seventh apart. And it tells me I'm correct. Here's an easy one. I see these notes are the same. Must be a unison. Now going from an E to an E. Well, they're the same letter name, so if it's the same letter name, it must be an octave apart. From G to a B, 1, 2, 3, that must be a third apart, and so on. So to do this activity, at least in this version, all I need to do is count. Later on, I'll give you an assignment like this with intervals where you'll have to know whether the intervals are major or minor or perfect, as I described before. For now, this is the one that I'm going to give you so that you can identify intervals in Tone Savvy. Good luck with it. Look for this posting on Google Classroom. Have a great day.